Hi, I'm Ashton, and today I'm going to be talking about the ever-present discourse of, do you need dysphoria to be trans? First off, let's define dysphoria. So, I'd say there are three main types of dysphoria, but some people define them in different ways, and that's totally fine too. There's body dysphoria, social dysphoria, and, I don't know how to describe the third one, but like assignment dysphoria. I'd say that the two main well-known types are body dysphoria and social dysphoria. Body dysphoria being when you are uncomfortable with your body for gender reasons, social dysphoria being when you are uncomfortable with the way that others perceive you for gender reasons. And then for me, assignment dysphoria is kind of like my discomfort with the sex that I was assigned at birth, and my discomfort with the name that I was assigned at birth. But I don't think that many people see that as dysphoria, but those are still things that I experience and that for me feel like dysphoria. So let's clarify the reason that I'm talking about this, and it's because, I've gotten some questions asking like, hey, do you think you need dysphoria to be trans? I have some friends that think that you do need dysphoria to be trans. I want to say that you don't need it, but I feel like it's more nuanced than a yes or no question. There are so many discoursey questions that people are like, well, do you, agree with this or not? And it's like, you realize that not everything is black and white. So I'm gonna deconstruct the argument of you need dysphoria to be trans a little bit. The first problem I see with this argument is that it completely ignores the concept of euphoria. Someone may experience dysphoria without recognizing it, but experience a strong sense of euphoria that they do recognize when they, not necessarily transition, but when they present in a way that is more comfortable for them. Like for me, I didn't recognize that I had dysphoria until I started presenting in a more masculine way and changed my name when I realized that I'm so much more comfortable with being perceived as masculine that being perceived as feminine started hurting a lot more. Ash Hardell and Aaron Sweeney made a whole video on gender euphoria. It's a really great video. I'll link it in the description. You should watch it. It's a good thing. Another problem I have with this is that equating being trans to having dysphoria kind of makes being trans seem like some giant tragic thing. It makes the trans experience seem, painful, and is it? Yes, of course, we all know that, but there's so much more to it than just dysphoria. Being trans essentially means that you identify with a gender other than the one that you were assigned at birth. Nowhere in that definition does dysphoria come into play. Transgender, adjective. Denotating or relating to a person whose sense of personal identity and gender does not correspond with their birth sex. There you go. Nothing about dysphoria. I feel like a lot of people also don't recognize that social dysphoria is a form of dysphoria. When people say that you need dysphoria to be trans, they often discount social dysphoria. But if somebody is completely comfortable with their body, but still wants others to perceive them the way that they want to be perceived, if that makes sense, that can still be a form of dysphoria. For some people, being called certain pronouns can cause dysphoria, and dressing a certain way because of the way other people will see you can cause dysphoria. And that's not an invalid form of dysphoria just because it doesn't have to do with directly your body. You don't have to hate your body to be trans, and that's something that I feel like a lot of people also kind of confound with the argument that you need dysphoria. Dysphoria, while it is harmful and terrible to deal with, it's not something that's necessarily constant. And there are moments where I was comfortable with having a chest. There were fleeting moments, yes, but the whole time I had a larger chest, I wasn't thinking constantly about the dysphoria behind it. I'm not dysphoric every day of my life. Most days, yes, again, but just because I don't feel dysphoria one day doesn't mean that I'm not trans anymore. Another thing that I take issue with the argument that you need dysphoria to be trans is that it kind of takes this idea that someone can determine someone else's gender and amplifies it. Because that's a pretty standard thing in cisgender world. But as a trans person, it sucks when people put their ideas of gender on me. Like when I dye my hair, wear more feminine things, wear sparkles, it doesn't matter. Other people's ideas of how gendered those things are shouldn't have to be on me, so why would we as trans people reject trans people that don't feel dysphoria? If somebody identifies and feels more comfortable with words that don't describe their birth sex, that's totally fine, and they can still identify with that. There is no precursor, there is no qualification exam to identifying with something that you were not born as. When you tell someone without dysphoria that claims to be trans that their transness and their gender isn't valid, you sound like a transphobe. You're saying to that person that you say you're transgender, but I say you're not because I know your gender better than you do. And the truth is, you don't. There is no set of rules that anybody should be forced to follow before they are allowed to have an identity. There are people that realize that they're trans before dysphoria happens. Like, dysphoria is not a precursor to being trans, and it is not a constant, and that's okay. One of the hardest parts about being trans and living as a trans person is that there is a constant gender that is imposed on me, whether it is the binary male side or the female side that I was assigned at birth. On legal documents and in school, those things are still imposed upon me, and I feel like that's a pretty common experience for most trans people. So I don't see why people argue that you need dysphoria to be trans when that's pushing someone's birth gender upon them, which is exactly what a lot of trans people like me have been struggling against our whole lives. People should be able to have a valid gender expression and a valid gender presentation no matter how they express that. To be transgender is not to be dysphoric. Does dysphoria very often indicate that someone is transgender? Yes, of course, but not every transgender person does experience it, and more importantly, not every transgender person experiences it the same way. Media constantly pushes this narrative, a man trapped in a woman's body, but the truth is, I'm a guy regardless of my body, and because my body is mine, it's a guy's body. I feel like restricting the trans experience to binary people that have dysphoria is in a way transphobic in itself. Trans people fight for our lives and fight for the ability to express who we are, and we shouldn't be taking that away from other people, whether we understand what they're going through or not. I feel like it's also insensitive and ignorant in a way. Dysphoria is a very Western society-centric, Eurocentric way of seeing trans people. Two-spirit people existed in indigenous cultures thousands of years before, white people colonized everything. 2,000 years before year zero, Egypt already had 3 genders. Enforcing the binary, typical genders that we have, and in hand enforcing that everybody must have dysphoria to be trans, is, in a way, Eurocentralizing all the trans experiences to what we expect it to be. But trans people and gender variant people have existed far longer than we can comprehend, and it hasn't always been focused on dysphoria, so it doesn't have to be focused on dysphoria today. Being trans and being non-binary doesn't always revolve around dysphoria, and that's important to remember, to respect other cultures, respect other people, and respect how people want to identify. It's not that difficult. As I'm, really fucking white, I can't really speak for those cultures, but in a way, I can't not see that pushing our modern idea of dysphoria onto all trans people is kind of invalidating and disrespecting people that identify with terms that have gone back generations and generations. Modern Eurocentric culture is not the only one that has trans people. That's just not how it works. If somebody identifies as trans, and if somebody identifies as something other than what they were assigned at birth, that's okay, and we shouldn't force them to, prove that they have dysphoria or prove that they dislike something about their body to treat them as we should treat people. I'm not saying that if you have dysphoria, you're wrong. I have dysphoria, but that doesn't mean that we have to push our idea of what it is to be trans onto other people. Your individual understandings of gender and how it works for you are completely valid, but it's also important to understand that it doesn't apply like that to everybody. Being trans is really complex. Dysphoria is not the only thing that factors into it, and just because you have dysphoria doesn't mean that everybody else does. You can't measure how trans someone is by how much dysphoria they have. It's just not something that you can do. Regulating other people's identities, I think, is kind of a waste of time when it comes down to things. There are so many other things we could be worrying about and talking about and speaking up for that I don't think gatekeeping people from the trans community is going to be effective at all. Gender is complex, and everybody understands it differently, and that's okay. If you think gender is a binary thing, fine. I don't care. I don't agree with you, but if that's how you see it and how you experience it, that's okay, that's fine. What I don't think is okay is to impose that on other people. If you have any ounce of compassion in you, then you would know that invalidating someone based on nothing other than your own experiences is just not a good thing to do. I don't know any other way to explain it. Tearing down people in the trans community simply because they don't experience dysphoria or they don't experience a specific type of dysphoria that you think you need to be trans just isn't productive. It's not something that we should be doing, I don't think. Just let people be themselves. Let people identify how they want to identify, because in the end, when it comes to being trans, it's a personal experience, and you can't define it for anybody but yourself. If you've got any counter-arguments, or if you agree with me, feel free to leave a comment and we can chat about it. Like I said, this is far more nuanced than I've ever seen people talk about it. Like, it's not two-sided, you know, it's a D20. Anyways, I'm gonna link a few articles in the description that I've read up on this about things that explain it far more eloquently than I myself can. So go read up on those if you can. Of course, they will be biased towards my point of view, but I feel like they bring up really good points and things that you should probably think about before you go and validate people's gender based on what they've told you about their experiences. Anyways, I hope that you feel valid in your own gender no matter what other people tell you, because in the end, it is your gender, not theirs. And I will talk to you later, maybe.